Join me as I dive into some spine-tingling ghost stories that are sure to give you chills tonight. There's something about the darkness of night that sparks our imagination, making us wonder what lurks in the shadows. And what better way to tap into that fear than by sharing some of the most terrifying ghost stories that will send shivers down your spine. Fear is a primal emotion that's embedded deep within our psyche, and ghost stories tap into that fear in a way that's hard to explain. Maybe it's the unknown, the unexplained, or the unsettling feeling that we're not alone in this world. Whatever it is, ghost stories have a way of exploiting our deep-seated fears, leaving us sleeping with the lights on and questioning what's real and what's just our imagination. The fear of the unknown is what makes ghost stories so fascinating. It's the possibility that there's something out there that we can't see, can't touch, and can't explain. It's the possibility that our consciousness continues beyond the grave, haunting the places and people we once knew. The unknown is what sparks our imagination, making us wonder what lies beyond the veil of the living. Our fascination with ghost stories is also rooted in our desire to make sense of the world around us. We want to believe that there's a logical explanation for the strange noises, the unexplained movements, and the eerie feelings we get when we're alone in the dark. But sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we just can't explain what's happening. And that's what makes ghost stories so terrifying, the possibility. There's something beyond our understanding, something that defies the laws of science and reason. Let me take you on a journey through some of the most captivating ghost stories. We'll leave you on the edge of your seat. From haunted mansions to creepy forests, these stories are sure to send chills down your spine. Imagine yourself walking through a dark forest, the trees towering above you like skeletal fingers, the wind howling like a chorus of restless spirits. You're not alone, and you know it. In a small town in rural America, there's a legend about a woman in white who haunts the local cemetery. They say she's the spirit of a woman who died in the 1800s searching for her lost child. People claim to have seen her wandering the graves, her long white dress fluttering in the wind. Some say she's harmless, while others claim she's a harbinger of death. Whatever the truth may be, one thing's for sure. If you ever find yourself in that cemetery at night, you'll be face to face with the woman in white. In Japan, there's a story about a vengeful spirit known as the Onryo. According to legend, the Onryo was once a woman who was brutally murdered by her husband. Her spirit was so consumed by rage and anger that it became a malevolent entity, seeking revenge on anyone who crossed its path. They say that if you ever encounter the Onryo, you'll be cursed with a lifetime of misfortune and tragedy. But the most terrifying ghost story of all is one that will leave you questioning what you believe. It's a story about a group of friends who decided to explore an abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. As they delved deeper into the depths of the building, they stumbled upon a room filled with old patient records. But it was what they found next that would change their lives forever. In the corner of the room, there was a single file with their names on it. The date of admission was the same day they decided to explore the asylum. As I wrap up these spine-tingling ghost stories, I want to leave you with a sense of unease, a sense of uncertainty that'll linger long after this video is over. These stories are a reminder that there's still so much we don't understand about the world around us, and sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones we can't see or explain. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the world of ghost stories. If you've got a terrifying tale to share, leave it in the comments below. And if you're ready for more, be sure to check out my next video, where I'll be exploring even more creepy tales that'll keep you up all night.
Whispers in the Asylum, Part 1. There's something unsettling about old buildings, isn't there? The way they creak, groan, and shift as if they're alive, holding their breath when you're not looking. You never know if it's just the wind or something else, something watching. Our town had one of those places, the old Brookview Asylum. It had been closed for decades, abandoned after a string of horrific patient suicides and deaths no one could explain. People claimed the asylum was haunted, that tortured spirits roamed the halls, seeking revenge for whatever had happened to them in the dark, hidden corners of the institution. Everyone in town knew the stories, but no one dared to confirm them. No one, except for us. It started as a stupid idea, one of those dares passed around at a party when you're drunk enough to feel invincible. 5 of us decided to sneak into the asylum, just to see," we said. It was always that phrase, the one people used to dismiss the shiver crawling up their spine, to pretend fear was just a joke. There was me, Harper, along with my best friends Jenna and Casey. The boys, Tyler and Ethan, were the usual thrill-seekers who egged us on. Ethan, especially, had a knack for pushing people beyond their comfort zones. He thrived on the rush. Jenna and I had been reluctant at first, but peer pressure and too much beer dulled our instincts. We gave in. We decided on a Friday night. It was dark enough to hide from prying eyes, and late enough that no one would be around to catch us. The asylum sat at the edge of town, on a hill surrounded by twisted trees that made the place seem even more eerie. It loomed in the distance, a towering silhouette against the moonlit sky, with broken windows and crumbling walls, like the skeleton of some monstrous creature long dead but not yet buried. Tyler led the way, his flashlight barely cutting through the dense fog that clung to the ground. Ethan was right behind him, with Jenna and I holding hands as we stumbled along the uneven path. Casey brought up the rear, muttering something about how we were all crazy for doing this. She wasn't wrong. "I don't like this," Jenna whispered, her voice trembling. "Relax," Ethan replied. "It's just an old building. There's nothing here." But we all knew that wasn't true. There was something about Brookview, something we could all feel. The air around it was heavy, thick with an energy that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. It was like walking into a place where time had stopped, where the walls had soaked up years of suffering and were now leaking it back out. We reached the front entrance, a set of rusted double doors that had long since rotted away. Ethan pushed one open with a loud creak that echoed through the empty hallways inside. "Ladies first," he said with a smirk, holding the door for us. Jenna shot him a look but stepped through, pulling me with her. The moment we crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped. It wasn't just the cold air seeping through the broken windows, it was a deeper kind of cold, one that seemed to wrap around your bones and settle there. The entrance hall was huge, with peeling paint and debris scattered across the floor. The smell of mold and decay hung in the air, and every step we took seemed to stir up the dust of forgotten memories. There were remnants of old furniture, a few broken chairs and desks, and on the far wall, a massive mural depicting serene, smiling patients with their arms outstretched as if welcoming us. "Creepy as hell," Tyler muttered, shining his flashlight over the faded faces. "You think they knew they were gonna end up here?" "Shut up," Casey hissed. "Let's just get this over with." We wandered deeper into the asylum, our footsteps echoing off the cracked tiles. Every so often, we'd hear something, a faint creak, a distant thud, and we'd stop, holding our breath, waiting for the sound to return. But it never did. It was always just one noise, like something was toying with us, reminding us that we weren't alone. "Guys," Jenna said after a while, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you feel that?" I did. There was something wrong. The air had grown heavier, almost suffocating, and there was a faint hum, like static, buzzing at the edges of my consciousness. I shook my head, trying to clear it, but it wouldn't go away. It was like the asylum was alive, breathing, its walls vibrating with something dark and hungry. We turned a corner and found ourselves in front of a massive metal door, its surface covered in rust and scratches. Above it, a sign read "Intensive Ward, High-Risk Patients." "Dare you to open it," Ethan grinned, pushing Tyler forward. Tyler hesitated, but only for a second. "Fine, you bunch of wimps," he said, grabbing the handle. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing a long hallway lined with rooms on either side. Each one had a small, reinforced window, and as we passed by, I couldn't help but peer inside. The rooms were empty, but there was something about them, an unnatural darkness that seemed to swallow the light from our flashlights. I shuddered, quickly looking away. We reached the end of the hallway, where a set of double doors stood slightly ajar. From inside, there was a soft sound, almost like whispering. Jenna clutched my arm. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. The others had heard it too. We stood there for a moment, frozen, unsure of what to do. Then, before any of us could react, the doors slowly creaked open, revealing a dark, empty room. I don't know why we walked inside. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear, or maybe something was pulling us in. But the moment we crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. The whispers grew louder. #### Whispers in the Asylum, Part 2. The room was pitch black, save for the thin beams of our flashlights trembling in the suffocating darkness. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears as the whispers grew louder, circling us like predators stalking their prey. They came from nowhere, yet everywhere at once, overlapping in a haunting, incomprehensible chorus. Jenna gripped my arms so tightly I could feel her nails digging into my skin. What is that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but fear had already crept into every syllable. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. "Okay, joke's over. We need to get out of here," Casey said, already heading for the door. She tugged on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Her panic quickly escalated. "It's stuck. It won't open." "Move," Ethan snapped, pushing her aside. He yanked at the door with all his strength, but it didn't budge. "What the hell?" Tyler aimed his flashlight at the door, revealing something none of us had noticed before. There were deep scratch marks all over it, like someone, or something, had clawed at it, trying desperately to escape. The metal surface was gouged and torn, and at the bottom of the door, there was a dark, reddish-brown stain that could only be one thing. Blood. "Oh, my God," Jenna whimpered, her voice barely audible. "Relax," Ethan said, though his own voice was tight with tension. "It's just old. Probably from some patient years ago. It doesn't mean anything." But it did. We all knew it. There was no ignoring the growing feeling of dread that had settled over us like a suffocating blanket. "I'm not staying in here," Casey said, backing away from the door. "There's another exit somewhere, there has to be." Tyler nodded, scanning the room with his flashlight. It was large and mostly empty, save for a few rusted gurneys pushed against the walls. There were no windows, no vents, just the stale, oppressive air pressing down on us. But in the far corner, there was something. A large metal cabinet stood partially open, its contents obscured by the shadows. "We should check that out," Tyler suggested. "Maybe there's something we can use to get the door open." "Are you serious?" Jenna hissed. "You think some old tools are going to help us? We need to get the hell out of here." Ethan rolled his eyes. "We're stuck, Jenna. We don't have many options." I wanted to agree with her, to scream that we should just break the door down if we had to, but a cold, rational part of my mind knew Ethan was right. We needed to do something, and searching the room was all we had. Reluctantly, we made our way to the cabinet. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the air itself was thickening, weighing us down. As we approached, the whispers seemed to fade into a low hum, still there, but more distant, as if whatever was speaking them had retreated, waiting. Tyler reached the cabinet first and pulled the door open the rest of the way. Inside, there were rows of small, metal boxes stacked on top of each other, covered in dust and grime. They looked like old patient files, probably forgotten for decades. "Great," Casey muttered, "what are we supposed to do with this? Read our way out?" "Shut up," Ethan said, wiping away the dust from one of the boxes. He pried it open, revealing a stack of worn, yellowed papers. "These are medical records." I stepped closer, squinting to read the faded text. The handwriting was barely legible, scrawled in a hurried, jagged script. But the more I read, the more uneasy I felt. *Patient 732. Female, 24. Exhibits extreme paranoia, claiming to hear voices that aren't present. States the voices are telling her to harm others. Treatment: electric shock therapy, sedatives. Outcome: failure. Patient hanged herself with bed sheets in her room, asterisk. I swallowed hard, glancing at the next record. Asterisk patient 815. Male, 38. Severe psychosis. Report seeing figures standing in the corners of the room, whispering his name. Believes he is being watched at all times. Treatment: isolation. Outcome: deceased. Cause of death: unknown, asterisk. What the hell is this place? Tyler muttered, flipping through more files. They're all like this. All the patients, they all heard things. Saw things. We need to leave, now, Casey said, her voice trembling. We're not supposed to be here. I'm trying to get the door open. Ethan snapped, heading back to the entrance, but the more I read, the more I realized the truth. The asylum had been a prison, not for the patients, but for something else. Something that had been feeding off their fear, their pain. Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder this time, more insistent. They filled the room, surrounding us, pressing in from all sides. But they weren't just whispers anymore, they were words. Clear, distinct, and chilling. Asterisk help us. Save us, asterisk. I froze, my flashlight flickering. The voices were desperate, pleading, and somehow, I knew they were coming from the patients, from the people who had suffered here long ago. But there was something else, a darker voice beneath the others, lurking in the background. It wasn't asking for help. It was laughing. We need to go, I said, backing away from the cabinet. Now. But before anyone could move, the door to the room suddenly flung itself open with a deafening crash. Cold air rushed in, and for a moment, I thought we were free. But then I saw it. A figure stood in the doorway, tall and gaunt, its face hidden beneath the shadows of a tattered cloak. It didn't move, didn't speak, but I could feel its eyes on us, watching, waiting. The laughter, the dark, sinister laughter, grew louder, filling the air with a sickening glee. Oh, my God, Jenna whispered, her voice breaking. The figure took a step forward. ### whispers in the asylum, Part 3. The figure in the doorway was unlike anything I had ever seen, or expected. Its body seemed to float just above the ground, shrouded in a thick, tattered cloak that swayed in the stale air. There were no discernible features, just an overwhelming sense of dread radiating from it, as if the darkness itself had taken form. It didn't move at first, just loomed there, its presence crushing the space around us, filling the room with the same malevolent energy that had poisoned this place for decades. The laughter, that low, sickening sound, swirled around us, but it didn't come from the figure itself. It was everywhere, echoing off the crumbling walls, seeping into the cracks of the floor. I couldn't tell if it was coming from the asylum or from inside my own mind. Ethan, still standing by the door, seemed frozen in place. His bravado from earlier had vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed terror that paralyzed him. "What the hell is that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Back up. Get away from it," I hissed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. None of us moved fast enough. The figure stepped forward again, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a chill racing up my spine. There was a faint scraping sound, like nails dragging across stone, and the temperature in the room plummeted even further. My breath came out in shaky clouds, and I could feel Jenna trembling beside me, her nails digging into my arm as if holding on to me was the only thing keeping her grounded. "We have to go," I whispered, but it felt useless. The door was blocked, and this thing, it was as if it had been waiting for us. Then, without warning, the whispers turned into screams. They erupted from the walls, from the very air around us, screams of pain, of terror, so loud and piercing that it felt like knives stabbing into my skull. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop. The voices were inside my head now, swirling and spinning, pulling me deeper into their madness. Jenna screamed, collapsing to the ground beside me, her hands clawing at her temples. Make it stop. Oh, God, make it stop. The others were in similar states. Ethan was backing into the wall, wide-eyed and gasping for breath, while Casey had fallen to her knees, rocking back and forth as if trying to escape the noise. Tyler, pale and shaking, stared at the figure, frozen in place. The figure moved closer, its presence consuming the space between us, its cloak shifting as though the darkness itself was alive. And then it spoke. But it wasn't a voice. It was a sound, an awful, guttural noise, like the grinding of bones mixed with the raspy breath of something not quite alive. The words were there, buried deep beneath the noise, but they weren't for us. They were for the spirits trapped here, the ones still lingering in this place, waiting for release. They will take you. The words pounded in my mind, and I staggered backward, clutching my head. I felt like I was going to be torn apart from the inside, every thought, every memory being pulled from me and devoured by the thing in front of us. Suddenly, the lights from our flashlights flickered violently before going out completely. We were plunged into darkness. No! I gasped, fumbling with my flashlight, but it was dead. The batteries must have drained in an instant. Beside me, Jenna sobbed uncontrollably, and I could hear Casey whispering something under her breath, some desperate plea to whatever gods were out there. In the pitch black, I could feel it, feel them. The spirits. They were closer now, brushing up against us, their presence cold and oppressive, their whispers once again becoming distinct. Asterisk, help us. Join us. Die with us, asterisk. I squeezed my eyes shut, but it didn't help. The room had become a living nightmare, every inch of space thick with the voices of the damned. I could feel them tugging at my consciousness, pulling me down into their world of endless torment. Then something cold and hard brushed against my arm, and I nearly screamed. But it wasn't a ghost. It was Ethan. Harper, he rasped, his voice shaky, we have to get out of here. Asterisk how, asterisk, I wanted to scream. We were trapped, the door blocked by whatever was standing there, and the spirits, they weren't going to let us leave. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes to the darkness, and that's when I saw it. A faint, flickering glow, dim, but unmistakable, coming from the far corner of the room. It was small, barely brighter than a dying candle flame, but in the midst of the crushing blackness, it was enough. There, I gasped, grabbing Jenna's arm. There's something over there. Jenna, still shaking, looked up, her face pale and streaked with tears. What is it? I don't know, but it's our only shot. We stumbled toward the light, the others following behind, their footsteps heavy and uneven in the dark. The glowing object grew brighter as we approached, and as we got closer, I realized what it was, a lantern. An old, rusted lantern hanging from a hook on the wall. Its flame flickered weakly, barely clinging to life, but it was enough to illuminate the immediate area around us. In the dim glow, we could see that the room wasn't empty after all. There were figures, pale, ghostly figures, lining the walls, their eyes hollow, their mouths twisted into silent screams. They were the patients. The ones who had died here. Oh my God, Casey whimpered. We're gonna die. No, we're not, I snapped, though I wasn't sure I believed it. We just need to stay together. Keep moving. But even as I said it, I could feel it, the pull of the asylum, the pull of whatever dark force had taken root here. It didn't want us to leave. It wanted us to join the others. I grabbed the lantern, the weak flame casting long shadows across the walls. The patients seemed to sway as we moved, their forms shifting in the dim light, but they didn't approach us. They couldn't, not yet. We have to find another way out, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There has to be another exit." "Look," Tyler said, pointing toward a door at the far end of the room. It was slightly ajar, and beyond it, I could see a faint glimmer of light. Without another word, we ran. Our footsteps echoed through the room as we dashed toward the door, the lantern swinging wildly in my hand. The patients along the walls seemed to wail as we passed, their hollow eyes following us, but they didn't move. I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse. We burst through the door, slamming it shut behind us. For a moment, we stood there, gasping for breath, our hearts racing. The room we had entered was smaller, less oppressive, but the feeling of dread still lingered. "What the hell was that?" Jenna gasped, her hands trembling as she wiped tears from her face. "I don't know," I said, clutching the lantern, "but we need to keep moving. We can't stop." We pressed on, the narrow hallway twisting and turning as we made our way deeper into the asylum. The whispers had faded, but the oppressive feeling remained. Every corner felt like it hid something, watching, waiting for us to falter. At the far end of the corridor, we found a stairwell. A sign above the door read basement. I hesitated. The idea of going even further into the belly of this place made my stomach churn, but there were no other options. "Are you serious?" Casey asked, her voice laced with fear. Tyler looked at the sign, then at me. "Do you really think there's another way out?" I swallowed hard, the weight of the lantern pulling me down. "It's either this or go back." With no other choice, we descended into the basement. The air grew colder, and I could feel it again, the darkness, the malevolent presence that had been with us all along. The laughter hadn't stopped. It was still there, waiting in the shadows, waiting for us to make the wrong move. We reached the bottom of the stairs and stood in front of another door, this one made of thick, reinforced steel. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. I could feel Jenna's breath on my neck, shaky and uneven. "Ready?" I asked, though none of us really were. I pushed the door open. #### Whispers in the Asylum, Part 4. The door groaned as it opened, revealing a hallway much different from the rest of the asylum. The air down here was stale, thick with a damp, musty odor that made it feel like we were stepping into a tomb. The walls were no longer lined with peeling paint and graffiti, but with cold, slick concrete, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed in the distance. For a moment, we stood there in stunned silence, the weak glow of the lantern flickering against the darkness. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, as though the weight of the asylum itself was pressing down on us. This feels wrong," Casey whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I know," I said, gripping the lantern tightly. The whispers had stopped entirely, and the sudden silence was unnerving. There was no laughter here, no haunting echoes, just a cold, empty stillness. It was as if the asylum was waiting for us to take the next step, daring us to go further. Tyler was the first to move, stepping cautiously into the hallway. "We don't have a choice," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "It's either this, or we stay trapped in that nightmare up there." He was right. As terrifying as this basement felt, staying behind wasn't an option. We followed him into the hallway, the sound of our footsteps muffled by the cold stone beneath us. The air was so thick that every breath felt like it was coated in dust, clogging my lungs. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, with the weak lantern barely illuminating the path ahead. I could feel the tension building, not just around us, but within us. Jenna hadn't said a word since we'd entered the basement, her face pale and drawn. Casey kept muttering to herself under her breath, her hands trembling at her sides. Even Ethan, who had always been the loudest and most confident, was unusually quiet, his eyes darting nervously between the shadows. After what felt like an eternity, we reached another door at the end of the hallway. This one was smaller, rusted around the edges, and slightly ajar. There was no sign, no indication of what lay beyond it. "Do we open it?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We have to, I replied, though every fiber of my being screamed to turn back. But I couldn't, not now. The pull of the asylum, that malevolent force, was growing stronger. We were being drawn deeper into its heart, and I had the sickening feeling that whatever waited for us beyond that door was far worse than anything we had seen so far. Tyler gave me a nod, then reached out and pushed the door open. The hinges squealed in protest as the door swung inward, revealing a small room that reeked of decay and stagnant air. The floor was covered in a thin layer of grime, and the walls were lined with old, rusted shelves. On the far side of the room, there was another door, but this one was different. It was reinforced, heavy, meant to keep something in. Another door? Jenna croaked, her voice trembling. What is this place? Ethan shone his flashlight around the room, illuminating what looked like old medical supplies scattered on the shelves, bottles of faded liquid, rusted surgical instruments, and strange, broken devices I couldn't recognize. It's some kind of storage room, he muttered. But, this door. I approached the reinforced door, my stomach knotting. There were deep scratches all over the metal surface, just like the door upstairs, but these were more frantic, more desperate. Someone, or something, had been trying to claw its way out. Do you hear that? Tyler asked suddenly, his voice tight. We all went still, listening. At first, I didn't hear anything. But then, there it was, a faint tapping sound. It was slow, rhythmic, coming from the other side of the door. Tap, tap, tap. It was methodical, deliberate, like someone tapping their fingernails against the metal. I felt the blood drain from my face. No. No, we can't. We have to see what's in there, Ethan cut me off, his face pale but determined. If there's another way out, it's through that door. I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. We don't know what's in there. It could be. But before I could finish, Tyler stepped forward and turned the handle. The door swung open with a low creak, and the smell hit us immediately. Something foul, rotten, like death itself had been sealed in this room for decades. The air was so thick with decay that I had to clamp my hand over my mouth to keep from gagging. Tyler's flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing what lay beyond. It was a small room, no bigger than a cell, and in the center was a single figure. My breath caught in my throat. It was a man, or what was left of one. He was sitting on a chair, his head slumped forward, his limbs contorted at unnatural angles. His skin was stretched tight over his bones, thin and translucent, and his clothes were tattered and stained. But the worst part was his face. There was no face. Where his features should have been, there was only a smooth, pale surface, like the flesh had grown over his eyes, nose, and mouth. His hands were bound to the arms of the chair with thick leather straps, and his body was so emaciated it looked as if he hadn't eaten in years. Jenna let out a choked sob, backing away. Oh my God. But as we stared, the tapping continued. I turned, horrified, to the door we had just opened, but the sound wasn't coming from the room. It was behind us now. Tap, tap, tap. I whipped around, the lantern trembling in my hand. The tapping was getting louder, closer. The floor beneath us seemed to pulse with the noise, and suddenly, I realized, the sound wasn't coming from behind us. It was beneath us. The floor, Casey whispered, her eyes wide with terror. It's coming from the floor. We all took a step back as the tapping grew into a banging, violent and rhythmic. The floorboards beneath our feet began to shake, and cracks started to appear, spreading out like jagged veins. Something was trying to get out. We have to go, I gasped, stumbling back toward the door. Asterisk now, asterisk. But it was too late. The floor exploded beneath us with a deafening crash, sending debris flying in all directions. I screamed as the ground gave way, and we were plunged into darkness, falling into the abyss below. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. Pain shot through my side, and for a moment, everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on cold, damp stone, the weak glow of the lantern flickering nearby. My body ached, and my head spun, but I was alive. I struggled to my feet, my vision blurry, and looked around. We had fallen into some kind of underground chamber, far below the basement. The walls were made of old, crumbling stone, and the ceiling above was jagged and broken where we had fallen through. "Jenna?" I called out, my voice hoarse. "Tyler? Casey?" There was a low groan nearby, and I saw Ethan pushing himself up from the ground, his face pale and bloodied. "I'm here," he gasped. "Where are the others?" "I don't know," I said, fear gnawing at my insides. I glanced around, searching the darkness for any sign of them, but there was nothing. The chamber stretched out before us, long and narrow, with no visible end. The lantern sputtered and dimmed, its flame barely clinging to life. I grabbed it, holding it up to cast as much light as possible. Ethan stumbled to his feet, wincing in pain, but there was no time to rest. The air down here was thick, almost tangible, and I could feel the malevolent presence growing stronger, like it was feeding on our fear. Suddenly, a soft voice echoed through the chamber. "Harper." It was faint, barely more than a whisper, but it was unmistakable. I froze, my blood turning to ice. "Jenna?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is that you?" There was no answer. Only the darkness, and the whispers, growing louder. ### whispers in the asylum, Part V. The whispers echoed through the darkness, wrapping around us like tendrils of cold, damp air. I could barely make out my own breaths as the sound of my name drifted from the shadows. The lantern in my hand flickered dangerously, casting weak, shaky light that barely penetrated the thick blackness of the chamber. "Harper," the voice was closer this time, just a breath away. "Jenna?" I called again, my voice tight with fear. My heart raced, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to run. But there was nowhere to go, just endless, crushing darkness. Beside me, Ethan was struggling to stand, clutching his side as he squinted into the void. "We need to find the others," he muttered, his voice strained. "We can't stay down here." "I know," I whispered, though every step forward felt like I was sinking deeper into a nightmare. "Harper," the voice called again, soft, pleading. It didn't sound like Jenna anymore. It sounded wrong. Twisted. "Don't follow it," Ethan said suddenly, grabbing my arm. His eyes were wide with terror, and in the dim light, I could see the fear etched into every line of his face. "That's not her." "But what if?" I said. "Don't," he snapped, his voice trembling. "That thing, whatever it is, it's not Jenna." I hesitated, torn between the need to find my friends and the primal fear gnawing at my insides. Ethan was right, something about the voice was off. It was too familiar, yet too alien at the same time. Like it was trying to be Jenna, but it couldn't quite get it right. The air around us seemed to thicken, the oppressive energy in the chamber growing heavier, almost suffocating. The whispers were all around now, overlapping, coming from every direction, filling the space with their sinister chorus. "Come closer," one voice murmured. "Help me," another pleaded. "They're all dead," a third one hissed, sending a shiver down my spine. I turned in a slow circle, my pulse hammering in my throat. The chamber seemed to stretch on forever, but there was something ahead, a faint glimmer of light, barely visible through the darkness. It wasn't much, but it was the only thing guiding us forward. "We have to move," I whispered to Ethan, gripping his arm tightly. "We can't stay here." He nodded, though I could see the fear in his eyes. "Stay close," he said, his voice low. We started walking, our footsteps muffled by the damp stone beneath our feet. The light ahead grew brighter with each step, but the voices followed us, whispering from the walls, from the floor, from the air itself. Turn back. Join us. You'll never leave. I tried to ignore them, tried to focus on the light, but with every step, the cold presence grew stronger. It was like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. My skin prickled, and I could feel something watching us, something just out of sight. We stumbled forward, driven by fear and desperation. The tunnel twisted and turned, the stone walls closing in around us. The lantern flickered again, its flame shrinking to a tiny, sputtering ember. Come on, I muttered, shaking it. We couldn't afford to lose the light now. Not down here. Not with them. Suddenly, there was a sound, a soft, shuffling noise, like footsteps scraping across the stone floor. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Ethan stopped beside me, his eyes wide as he turned toward the sound. There, at the edge of the light, something moved. A figure, pale and emaciated, emerged from the shadows, its limbs twisted and gaunt. Its face was hidden beneath a mop of filthy, matted hair, but its eyes, those eyes, gleamed in the faint light of the lantern. They were wide, hollow, and hungry. Oh my God, Ethan gasped, taking a step back. The figure lurched forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being yanked along by invisible strings. Its mouth opened, and a low, guttural moan escaped its lips, a sound that sent ice through my veins. Harper, it rasped, its voice barely human. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't a person. This was something else. Something, dead. Go! I shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm and pulling him back. Run! We turned and bolted down the corridor, the lantern swinging wildly in my hand. The whispers grew louder, shrieking in my ears, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I could hear the figure behind us, its twisted limbs scraping against the stone as it crawled after us, its moans echoing through the tunnel. The light ahead of us was growing brighter now, and as we rounded the corner, we saw it, a door. A heavy, metal door at the end of the tunnel, slightly ajar, with light spilling through the crack. We're almost there. Ethan gasped, his voice ragged. I could hear the figure gaining on us, its breath wet and rasping, but I forced myself to keep running. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't care. We were so close. We reached the door, and I shoved it open, the metal groaning in protest. Bright light flooded the tunnel, momentarily blinding us. I stumbled through, pulling Ethan behind me, and slammed the door shut just as the figure reached it. There was a loud bang as it slammed against the door, followed by that awful, guttural moan. The metal rattled, but the door held. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath, my heart racing in my chest. Ethan slid down beside me, his face pale and drenched in sweat. We made it, I whispered, though the relief was short-lived. The room we had entered was unlike any part of the asylum we had seen before. It was sterile, pristine, like a laboratory frozen in time. Stainless steel tables lined the walls, covered in old medical equipment and tools that looked far too clean for a place that had been abandoned for decades. But what caught my attention was the large metal cabinet against the far wall. It was covered in thick chains, padlocked tightly, as though someone had gone to great lengths to keep whatever was inside locked away. What is this place? Ethan muttered, pushing himself to his feet. I didn't have an answer. The chamber felt different, like we had stepped into another world entirely, one that wasn't part of the asylum we had been wandering through. The air was still, the oppressive energy absent, but there was something about the cabinet, something that felt wrong. As we approached, I noticed something strange. There was a faint humming sound coming from within the cabinet, barely audible, but persistent. It was rhythmic, almost mechanical, like the sound of a machine ticking away behind the metal door. Ethan reached for one of the padlocks, his hand trembling. We have to open it. I grabbed his arm, pulling him back. No. We don't. He looked at me, his face pale and drawn. Harper, whatever's in there, it might be the key to getting out of this place. Or it might be the reason this place is cursed, I shot back, my voice tight with fear. You don't know what's inside that thing. Neither of us moved for a moment, both of us torn between the possibility of escape and the overwhelming fear that whatever was in that cabinet was better left sealed away. Then, from behind the door we had just come through, came a sound, a soft, insistent tapping. Asterisk tap. Tap. Tap asterisk. The figure was still there. Asterisk tap. Tap. Tap asterisk. But the sound wasn't coming from the door anymore. It was coming from the walls. The whispers began to stir again, faint at first, but growing louder with each passing second. The sterile air in the room began to shift, growing heavy and thick, just like the rest of the asylum. Whatever we had left behind in the tunnels wasn't done with us yet. Ethan's eyes locked with mine. We have to choose, he whispered. The humming inside the cabinet grew louder. The tapping on the walls intensified. And I realized, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that the real nightmare hadn't even begun yet. The end, for now.